Traditional leadership gets you compliance. Servant leadership gets me commit.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Web3 CMO Stories podcast. My name is Joeri Billast, I'm your podcast host. And today I'm honored to be joined by Kurt. Hi Kurt, how are you?
Hey, thank you for having me.
Guys, if you don't know Kurt Uhlir, he's known as the king of scaling companies. Kurt is a CMO and a growth operator who has helped lead more than 60 acquisitions and exits, supported by a $880 million IPO and scaled companies from early growth to over $1.4 billion in revenue. You've scaled companies across very different markets and technologies. When you zoom out, what actually causes growth to compound versus quietly stall as organizations get bigger?
Oh, yeah. I think for me, so many companies have the ability to grow or scale, but it is what stalls them out. At the beginning, it's a misallocation of time horizons. Like too many teams overinvest in 2 to 12 months, and they underinvest in systems that create momentum at a 12 to 36 month time frame and then a 36 plus month time frame. I mean, the growth also will stall when the execs, even if they've done that, do not intentionally segment their conversations to those 3 time frames, and therefore they'll bounce between them and be reactive in discussions. And when they do that, it doesn't allow them to stay with tracking the leading indicators versus lagging indicators, because especially in the short term, I want to track those lagging indicators. I want revenue, I want signups. But if they bounce between those time frames, even in their discussions, then they're not properly going to be able to test hypotheses or give strategies the time to evolve over time. And so I find the other thing that you can so look at it as something that holds it back, but on the other side, what helps it grow is there's this big dichotomy I see on technology right now where leaders will either overtrust technology, AI is going to solve everything, we should replace 90% of our team, or they almost ignore it because they do not personally have the technical literacy. And so what I find helps that is they should be hiring, instead of hiring role fillers, they should be hiring tech forward people to fill those roles that they will trust to figure it out. And then instead of being the leader that's making the decisions, they're instead going to say, I don't know this. They're going to be innately curious. And then they ask questions and they will try to actually not make the final decision. They're going to bring those forward technology thinkers and let them come up with structured tests that they can do to improve things. And when they do that properly, growth just happens naturally.
I love that you touched on so many things I'm always also describing in my book, actually. I'm talking about CMO should be a marketing technologist. The technology is really important. And I see this a lot. People expect from marketing directly sales, and they expect directly to use the latest tools and technologies and AI. My question for you would be, you see too many teams rush into AI for efficiency, but you focus on trust, you focus on narrative. Where do you see AI most often breaking trust instead of strengthening it?
Yeah, trust is so critical right now, especially on the B2B side and growth over time. Increasingly, I'm having problems with the AI. It's getting more powerful, but it's also hallucinating more and causing problems, which leads to trust issues. And so I find that AI companies are breaking trust when they're using AI to publish content at volume without human oversight. They have an agency or a team person that comes in and basically says, hey, we need 1,500 articles on a monthly basis or weekly basis. And the problem is AI is increasingly hallucinating facts, even strict guidelines that you give it, or the text feels robotic. Not all the time. Maybe it's really great, but then you get to a paragraph or sections where it sounds chaotic. And even if you're using personalization tricks, it almost feels manipulative at times, the way some of the AI is doing it. And so I think that's how it's breaking trust, as opposed to using AI to push content that it doesn't necessarily look always slick, but you can use it to find gaps in mistakes that you're having. I use it to enhance quality. So it's not just the speed, but I'm using it for deep edits. Repurposing content is huge for building that trust. Because like somebody might find my B2B brand on TikTok and then they're going to hear the same message on the YouTube in a longer form, and they're going to find snippets of it in different articles, and then they may find it repurposed into a newsletter. And so that's ways I'm able to use AI to build trust while also at the same time identify gaps that it's like I'm hiring now the best editors I possibly can because I want that top 1% or that top 0.1% editor because when I combine them with AI, I can truly outperform competitors versus I see a lot of companies using AI right now, or they're just relying on traditional ways to write content and produce stuff. And it's almost like lighting cash on fire. Hey, you just gave me an extra $1 million for revenue or for marketing. I want to do something with that. And most companies, they don't realize it, but they might as well just light it on fire if they're kind of just going as fast as they possibly could with AI as opposed to using it to build trust.
Yeah, as fast as I could, but maybe in the wrong direction. If you go fast. What I find interesting about AI, I mentioned already the book, is the capability of finding patterns. So, I have all these different people like you that call my podcast, that share their wisdom. Now, AI is really strong in putting that together and find certain patterns of that. Now, another point is you already mentioned is decision making. From your experience as an operator, what is the real difference between adopting AI tools actually changing how decisions get made inside a company?
I love that question because what I see at most companies, especially in that mid-market stage right now, where they're later stage venture, private equity backed, when they say adopting AI, what they actually mean, and they don't realize it, is they mean buying tools or just testing a new workflow or automating a few tasks. They're not thinking about transformation and decision making. And so the real shift happens when they, especially at the executive level, where it's most helpful, I find, to start thinking about AI as a thinking partner, not a replacement for themselves or their team. So, like in my marketing teams, we're using AI to pressure test strategies before we launch. So, we'll simulate different personas. We'll use AI to force us to confront blind spots that we may not necessarily see because we're also trying to go really fast. Um, you'll use AI then for decision making to shorten that iteration loop, not just the testing, but we're using AI to go from hypothesis to a version 10 in minutes or an hour as opposed to weeks or months. And so that can radically influence the tempo change. And then I will also use it to surface objections and customer language in real time. To your point about patterns, often before our competitors are doing it or even realizing that those patterns exist. So it's like I intentionally have workflows where I'm having the AI play devil's advocate, become the persona, look for where that persona is talking about things on Reddit and Quora and forums and bring in our thing, recorded conversation and help it to identify blind spots that we do not see yet and then accelerate our draft to feedback cycle. When I can do that, I can completely reframe how decisions get made. So it's no longer necessarily top down, which so many leaders think like I have to be the decision maker. Instead, everyone on the team can explore what if scenarios without having a committee. And then leaders can stop relying on just their gut instinct and we can interrogate their gut instinct or logic with AI pressure testing.
Yeah. I love that you show that you have a system and you work with companies with AI, but most companies I see, they are using ChatGPT or they're using AI where they don't have a strategy. When leaders come to you and they say, oh, it doesn't work or AI adoption failed because of the culture, what is actually the deeper issue that maybe they are not willing to confront?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you or I are old, but we're old enough to have been around through several things like AI from technology waves that have come through. It's almost never the technology's fault itself. In that case, for me, it almost always is the culture is the issue. And so that technology gets scapegoated. And so it's a culture, but it's really the leadership perspective. And so what ends up saying is the leaders cannot fully articulate what a successful AI enabled team would look like. They just say, let's go implement it. And then they're like, hey, it failed. Well, you didn't set up what the team should look like afterwards. There's a fear of visibility. Like people tend to be concerned. I'm seeing if I look back historically at what's failed for them because AI would expose that they've been flying blind. And frequently, I find a lot of companies have been. And they were concerned about that when instead of like, I want the AI to tell me where my gaps are up front. People also don't the leadership themselves, they have not enabled their teams to feel safe failing in public, like transparently in front of the whole team. And so most AI adoptions, it's not going to work right the first time. It's not going to work right the 12th time. A lot of times you have to iterate through this. And so you have to enable your teams to fail, tell you why they failed, allow you to coach them through the end results and outcomes that you want. And if they don't feel comfortable, that's not on the team's fault. That's your fault as a leader. They don't feel comfortable coming to you. And so underlying that, it's like, it's always this concept to me of they may be a nice person, but they're really an authoritative leader where their team views them as, if I get this wrong, if I don't do what you said at the time frame that you said, if I'm not implementing AI in the exact way that you said, you're going to fire me. And so people go very protective of their jobs. And so for me, that's really like that at the end of the day, if the behaviors are going to follow whatever your incentives are and the systems that are set up. And so that's why most of the AI fails.
Yeah, but in general, with every change, people want to protect their job if something is new, every automation that is there. Now, you built go-to-market systems that survived massive scale. What signals tell you early on that the GTM strategy will collapse later under pressure?
Yeah. I'll go through them quickly and then I may talk just about each one, but there's 5 signs for me that really struck that go-to-market strategy is going to fail. Attribution. People are concerned about attribution over contribution. People rely too much on pay-per-click. And so second thing is the product and marketing, they drift apart. You'll see that in things when product starts to get a product marketer separate from the marketing organization, your GTM strategy is going to fall apart. The third thing would be the marketing system was built to serve the boardroom, not the buyer. Like kind of that attribution versus contribution. They often, I see a lot of times too, they're focused on a single playbook. I kind of alluded to it, but so often VC-backed companies and private equity-backed companies, the latest funder comes in with the playbooks that worked 15 years ago and 10 years ago, and they force it in as the only option from the playbook. And that's why I see such turnover in the successful names of the top PE firms right now, because the ones that are successful realize they need multiple playbooks. And then the fifth thing I mentioned in the very beginning is they do not have a time horizon diversification. They are only looking at a marketing go-to-market plan. And usually that's going to be almost entirely weighted just at that 2 to 12 month viewpoint. And they haven't come back and looked at those 3 timeframes that I looked at. But that first one is really kind of the key for me in everything. I go into it, and it's the bane of why so many private equity companies and later stage venture capital companies fail. At some point, they keep growing in value, and then there's some acquirer who's come in with a major check or completely bought out the company, and they're left with a company that ends up like at a third of the value. Well, what happens when I've come in and to try to help fix that ship afterwards very often is I go back and look, everybody was so focused on their KPIs or OKRs, and they didn't like, we got a new customer. They brought in $10 million a year. Does it really matter if it came from my marketing campaign or from sales or from product? At the end of the day, maybe the CFO actually went to high school with the person. And that's what started the relationship. I got credit for it from a pay-per-click and sales closed it. But 90% of the contribution was the fact they were friends from early school. That's a contribution approach about how successful teams really look at things. And too often as companies get to try to be concerned with scaling, they're so focused on who gets credit for both what went well and who does not get credit for the failures. Like I've stepped in $100 million plus companies and like, okay, we lost a major account, a $50 million account. Whose fault was it? Well, maybe it wasn't product's fault. Maybe sales did not actually oversell. Maybe it was set up because marketing had a bad perception that we put in place with the press release and social media. Like until you actually care about diagnosing who all has actually contributed to losing that customer or winning the customers, you can't actually uncover what's real, which if you don't know what's real, none of the rest of it really matters.
And this brings me to a point I also see that people or companies are chasing like these vanity metrics. They want visibility. They want to see, oh, we are present everywhere, or you see these influencers showing up and so on. And that's also one of the points I speak a lot about you also, about trust. So it's not only about visibility, but the trust is important. And also on writing the book, came back to the idea that visibility without trust is backfiring eventually. Now, from your perspective, Kurt, where do modern CMOs most optimize for visibility at the expense of long-term trust?
I love that question. I love your approach to trust on it as well. I mean, you even mentioned influencers there. It's like agencies ruin so many parts of marketing. And it's like if I go to most marketers now and I mentioned about influencers, in their mind is paid influencers, which to me is no different than paid media. You can buy a sponsorship for TV or with streaming service or paying somebody to talk about your product. That's not influencer marketing. That's just paid media and sponsorship. And so that's part of it. But I'd say fundamentally, what CMOs don't realize, and they're scared to tell their board this, because in most industries, you are not the number one, number two, or number three brand. And so if you're not, what the board needs to hear right away is that this is backed by research, not just that I've seen it at hundreds of companies, but Forrester, Gartner, McKinsey have all done independent research that says at the end of the day, especially in the B2B market, the decision makers will between 50 and 75% of all decisions always go with the top three most visible brands, the largest companies. And it's not because those products are the best. It's because from a trust perspective, the decision makers, they're so concerned right now about making a bad decision. They don't want to be left buying a bad egg and being the person that says, I bought the bad this, that they will almost always choose a lesser quality product so they can go, well, we chose one of the biggest companies. And so they're going to then opt from a chief marketing officer perspective, they're going to opt for those vanity metrics because the CMOs know, or they should know, like that 50 to 75%. Imagine if you walked into the boardroom ahead of time and said, look, if we do not invest in trust, and this is what I'm going to walk through what that looks like to you, Mr. and Mrs. People on the board. If we do not invest in trust, if we do not invest in things that aren't going to just change the revenue in the next 2 to 3 months, we lose 7 out of 10 deals of people that sign up on our website. 7 out of 10 people that come to our events, that show up to webinars, 7 out of 10 of them will not choose us. That's what it actually means. And like then you can shift the conversation. Otherwise, but since most people don't want to have that healthy conflict, they never have that conversation. And so the CMOs typically know, well, if I don't have that healthy conflict and that conversation up front, I'm going to be out of work in the next 18 months on average. And so they just optimize for maybe staying 18 months, maybe 24 at the tops, and they never have that better thing. And so they're going to opt for the vanity metrics of visibility.
Right. And then it will be average and it will be, they will not stand out with the company. I had a business intelligence company before. And then what people used to say is IT directors, you cannot be fired or get fired by hiring SAP or buying SAP because, everyone is using SAP. But maybe it's not the best solution for everyone. It was just like, in terms of not taking any risk. And then, a friend of mine, Mark Schaefer, has a book which is called Audacious. He talks about you need to do audacious marketing, do stuff that no one else is doing. Now, another thing you mentioned, the word blind spots. I love that. I also asked it to the, AI, what are my blind spots? Because AI is often agreeing with you. So I said you often talk about blind spots. Leaders defend as being correct. So what is actually one blind spot that you see repeatedly in senior marketing and executive teams today?
It's not always just the same thing that they're wrong about, but and from a category perspective, the blind spot is that, and applies to every leadership role, is that they think that they are right about things that they're really wrong about. And it takes a minute to get your mind around that. So for the listeners, if you think back about the last even just like 12 months of your career, not that something has shifted in the market. And so by all means, we start seeing trends and we start putting things in place and the market changes. That's not something that you're wrong about. But there's decisions that when you look back, new data came up and you had a moment where you realized that something that you thought you were entirely correct on the new data comes out and you realize I could have gone back in time and realized that I was making the wrong decision at that time. And so, for examples that I think about, I was at a company early on in social media management where there were two big enterprise plays. We were one of them, called Vitcher, that's Apple and Samsung Mobile, and everybody used to manage all of their social media profiles. And so we thought that we needed, and we were told by our customers that we had to create local offices in Chicago and Paris and everywhere to be right where our customers are, the way a lot of agencies have done. So we started doing that. And we get about 7 months into that. And we're rolling out. We have like 30 or 40 people now at the team. We've got leases starting to come up. And not only is it not helping our sales and our customer relationships, it's actually making them worse because our customers think that we're available all the time because we're in the same city. And so we checked. It only took us like 4 or 5 days to pressure test that. We realized it was the wrong decision, and we should have known it was the wrong decision when we made it. And so at that moment, we did have to figure out, what do you do with those people you've hired? But like, that's one of those cases where it was a unanimous board decision. It was a unanimous executive decision. We could have chosen something different. We were wrong. And so I think the biggest blind spot is not realizing that there are at least three major things that you think you're right about right now in your business unit, in your company, that you're actually wrong about. And so like, I literally every morning when I'm brushing my teeth, I don't, I don't live in a world of negative, but I take about 30 seconds just to be open to, what could I be wrong about right now? And then I actually make a point in my one-on-ones to close my one-on-ones. It's on my agenda that says, hey, Joeri, what could I be wrong about that I'm not seeing? Do you have a different gut feel? You don't even have to have it fully formed, but what should I be thinking about differently than the way I am today? And the only response you can have after asking that in one-on-ones is a curious question, never to justify, because otherwise it doesn't work right for kind of gathering new information. And if you can overcome that, you will uncover blind spots sometimes 2 years before you otherwise would. And so imagine if instead of waiting for 2 years, you could pull back those mistakes 6 months to 24 months early, and how many more iterations you could go through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I think a lot of leaders, they are at a certain level and they don't ask those questions, or maybe don't take the risk, or maybe like you say, you don't know what you don't know, and they think that that is the truth. Now let's talk about servant leadership. It sounds soft to some executives. How does it actually increase the speed, accountability, and execution in high growth environments, you think?
Yeah, I wrote this really long article, probably ended up being a book. It's part of one of my keynotes, called The Business Case to Servant Leadership, because servant leadership, it's not soft. It's actually tactical. It removes friction. It builds alignment faster. It uncovers gaps in strategy, costs, and opportunities, all while making the whole team and company much more resilient. The way that I think about it is, I mentioned like authoritative leadership. Well, authoritative leadership, and everybody overcomplicates things, but authoritative leadership is that concept that at the end of the day, I'm going to fire you if you don't do what I said in the way that I said it. The servant leadership approach is just very different, that says, look, I didn't hire you to do a job. I hired you to reach a business outcome. The moment that that happens, from a servant leadership perspective, I have to make sure it's on me that you understand the outcomes that I want. And then I need to make sure I can remove all of the hindrances and give you the resources to get those outcomes that I want. Well, when you do that, accountability takes care of itself, because everybody's extremely clear the results we want out of the company. Where some people think it's soft, traditional leadership gets you compliance. Servant leadership gets me commitment. So I want you on board to actually go towards the conflict, find the problems, get those outcomes, not just do what I told you to do.
When I speak to companies or I give trainings myself, I see that people having difficulties to implement AI, there is a lot of resistance, of course, depending on the leadership. Where do you see this internal resistance usually coming from first? And how can strong leaders address this without forcing compliance?
The first resistance I see tends to be with mid-level managers that are either afraid of how they lead teams being exposed, or they're concerned with the redundancy in their roles. And they think, like, they push back on it, whether they fully comprehended this or not, but they think AI is going to replace me. So it's usually that mid-level manager. Smart leaders, on the other hand, they realize that they should be using AI to amplify. It's going to amplify what they do. It's going to help clarify things. It's not going to replace them. If you're a mid-level manager, maybe you're going to be managing 50 people or 100 people as opposed to 8. But otherwise, it might actually end up replacing. I think the smart people are realizing that they're trying to approach it as, how do I create opt-in pilots, and then like, how do you take those mid-level managers and you reward them for experimenting things and being transparent, and then allowing team-led discoveries to reduce fear. I think the resistance happens when companies just come and they start to push it down to the mid-level managers, as opposed to being very transparent across the entire team and creating almost that level for them to share what's working, what's not, where they have questions. That concept of, yeah, like, there are no dumb questions, especially in terms of AI now. So many things are changing. I had like 50 calls in 30 days from AI visibility tools trying to sell me as the chief marketing officer. So I literally just called several venture capitalists that I knew, and like 2 of them are like in the top 10 names in the world that have written checks. And I called quite a few people that were building some of these companies, and all of them told me the same thing. AI visibility tools are all just vaporware. Like, we've now seen that with Surfer SEOs come out with the thing, and Atros has, saying like, hey, when you prompt the AI versus actual human prompts, you get very different responses. But here was 2 companies, major VCs, that have written $10 million plus checks, one like a $75 million check, and they're like, yeah, it's vaporware. What? Well, like, that's a transparency then that you take back to your teams and be like, should we be using one? Well, yes, we are using one, but it changes the influence that we're going to give to it. It changes how we use it. It says, hey, look, you can't experiment with these things.
It's a lot of conversations I have these days, because I'm also in AI visibility marketing. Is indeed about that. It's about tools also on my podcast. I have guests. It's about geo showing up in the AI answers. Curious to hear your opinion about that. Where are we going? Where should we focus on if now people are listening to that? SEO, geo, all these different terms. What would you tell to those people where to focus on?
Yeah, I don't completely agree with that. It's all vaporware, but I think about with where we're at with it, it's much where SEO was 20 years ago. And so the tools are really good for like the canary in a coal mine to see where you're at. I'm building a company right now that we have a portfolio of companies, but we have built one of the largest real estate platforms in the United States, comparable to Zillow from a size perspective. I simply could not run enough AI prompts to truly tell you, when people search for homes for sale in Roswell, Georgia, condos for sale in Roswell, Georgia, houses with pools, I could not possibly run enough tests to know what my AI visibility was across the country. But that doesn't mean that I cannot get value from them doing local tests and then extrapolating that. I think that it may also be different next week. And so I use it much more for trend analysis. Do we show up at all? Especially when I see where competitors are continually showing up. So I think where people should really think about it in terms of AEO or GEO, to your point, or SEO, it is search everywhere optimization. I work at B2B companies. You may not realize it, but if you're selling technology solutions that are $10 million a pop, there's still people that are searching for your terms on TikTok and YouTube, Apple Podcasts. And so you need to have marketers that are capable of thinking about that everywhere, thinking about terms of search everywhere optimization. That's where the future is going.
Well, thank you for your enthusiasm and your passion and all the tips that you shared with us, Kurt. We are coming towards the end of this episode. I think people will be excited if they listen to this episode. Um, where can I send those people that they want to learn more about you, the work that you're doing? Where would you like me to send them?
My personal website at kurtuhlir.com is that I write a lot about this myself. And for those that are in the United States, I'm on the board for and run a group called CEO Netweavers for paid forward servant leaders that are all C-suite executives. By all means, search for CEO Netweavers. We would love to have more paid forward people that want to kind of open up cross-functionally and have a lot of these conversations that you have behind the scenes. And we get together to do that.
As my listeners know, Kurt, there are always show notes. There is a blog article. Everything you mentioned will be found in there. So yeah, if you're now listening in the car, go check it out. Kurt, it was really a pleasure. Really interesting to have you on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
If this conversation resonated, feel free to share it with other marketers or founders who might benefit from it. You will find the full article and show notes on the blog, with the video version coming soon. Quick thanks to Rio, whose wallet is now available on Android in addition to iOS, and to Metricool for supporting the podcast. If you're not following the show yet, this is a great moment to do so. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.